And now I invite Amber Triplett to come and light the chalice and lead us in our affirmation of covenant, which is in your order of service. Amber is our newest staff member who is working to help with Karen with her position.
I light this chalice with these words. Open your eyes to see what is beautiful. Open your minds to learn what is true. Open our hearts to love one another. Please join me in the affirmation of covenant, which you will find printed in your order of service, saying, Love is the doctrine of this church. The quest for truth is the sacrament, and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge and freedom, to serve humankind in fellowship, to the end that all souls shall grow into harmony with the divine. Thus do we covenant with one another.
We have just formally welcomed new members to this church in a ceremony that appropriately reminds us all of the mission of our church, our expectations of church members, and our covenant. In so doing, we continue the revival of practical covenanting that began among us in 1997 with the publication of the UUA Commission on Appraisal's collective reflection in a report called Interdependence. Following that report came a 4-year period of further collective reflection and study called Fulfilling the Promise. One fruit of that time was a series of lectures delivered in the year 2000 by my colleague, the Reverend Dr. Alice Blair Wesley, titled The Lay and Liberal Doctrine of the Church, the Spirit and the Promise of Our Covenant. Given at the invitation of the Men's Lecture Series Committee at First and Second Church in Boston. That's one church that used to be two, and annually sponsors these lectures. And in those lectures, she said, ours is a covenantal church. We join by promising one another that we will be a beloved community, meeting together often to find the ways of love as best we can see to do. We have found there's always more to learn about how love really works and could work in our lives and in the world. It is certainly possible for people to be in an implicit covenant without saying so. They just gather and act together freely in love for good ends. Yet our local church covenant needs to be as clear and explicit as we can make it, that we may teach it to our children as the reasonable explanation they deserve of why we do things as we do in this church, and that we may invite others, as many others as will, to join us in making and renewing again and again our promise of loyalty to the ways of love that matter most in human life, that we might fulfill our promise. The connection between membership and covenants could not be closer. Covenant making is what holds our non-creedal, independent, self-governing congregations together. Our congregations and our association of congregations are grounded not in an assent to a formula of belief, but in the faithful promise to be a beloved community together to the best of our ability. Implicit in this practice is the humble recognition that making, breaking, and remaking promises is a feature of the human condition. It's a process integral to our gradual discovery of our best selves and our mature efforts to be at our best as much as possible in the course of living our faith together. And so we reaffirm our covenant when welcoming new members and do our best to call ourselves and each other back to its promises when we stray, always in the spirit of mutual love and encouragement. Reverend Dr. Wesley said, "Deep love and careful social shared reasoning in the church evokes deep loyalty to love's end, which is meaningful freedom." Meaningful freedom. Freedom within the boundaries defined by a high degree of tender caring and within which all are fully included as equals. Ultimately, the only freedom adequate to human dignity is the freedom to do what love asks of us. And the greatest blessings in life come to us and through us and to all the world when, with intimate and freely bonded companions, we are trying together to live with the integrity of faithful love. In another passage, she emphasized the aspect of learning in covenant making. The substance of the free church is the spirit of neighborly love. The one purpose of everything the gathered members do is mutual edification. That is, mutual learning and teaching concerning the ways of love, one topic with an infinite number of subtopics. Since the ways of love are to be sought in all life's complexities. Similarly, our Unitarian Universalist principles in Article 2 of the UUA's bylaws say that we covenant to affirm and promote acceptance of one another and encouragement to spiritual growth in our congregations. All of this seems so clear to us now. Why was there ever a need for a revival of covenanting those 27 years ago? It was a need far too long unrecognized and unaddressed. For nearly 2 centuries, from their founding during the Great Migration from England to Massachusetts in the 1630s until the early 19th century, the churches of our religious forebears hummed along in good covenantal habits. The spirit of mutual love made room for some diversity of religious opinion to develop, as well as some adjustments to collective practices. Then, in the early 1800s, 2 decisive changes came at the same time. One was the big argument known to the church historians as the Unitarian controversy. This argument was about the ideas our churches taught, which people who cared a lot about religious orthodoxy felt was a crisis of integrity. Gradually and steadily over 2 centuries, the original Puritan belief that an ecstatic experience of God was a necessary qualification for church membership had evolved towards a belief that not everybody had such experiences, and that faith was more commonly a learning process. The touchstone of the controversy became the doctrine of the Trinity. Those who seemed unable to clearly affirm it were pejoratively called Unitarians. Those more committed to the spirit of mutual love than to any intellectual doctrine did not want this controversy, and it took them 15 years and at last the eloquence of William Ellery Channing to claim the name Unitarian with pride. This controversy in itself had no effect on our habits of covenanting, but it split the churches and led eventually to their disestablishment as the state churches of Massachusetts, The loss of state financial support meant that pew rentals began to be more important, sometimes more even than the spirit of mutual love. Imagine having to pay for the chair you're sitting in every year. And people began to forget why we had covenants in the first place. At about the same time, the success of groups like the British Bible Society made the nonprofit corporation a very popular form of organization. And its attributes began to compete with traditional church structures as raising funds became a more urgent part of church life. As Dr. Wesley stated, thus it came to be that over time and with a curious inconsistency, when Unitarians turned their attention from the governance of the local church to any good work beyond its walls, we took for granted the hierarchical structure of a nonprofit corporation, even for gathering new Unitarian churches. Our oldest congregations preserved their historic covenants on paper, but did not talk about them much. It was not until the late 1980s that Unitarian church historians began to appreciate that many of our contemporary problems could be traced to our disconnection from our covenantal roots. When, in 1989, the highly respected historian Conrad Wright published his book, Walking Together, to reintroduce those roots to Unitarian laypeople, it started the ball rolling toward a revival in 1997 when, even as the Commission on Appraisal's Interdependence Report went to press, so too did his next book, Congregational Polity. This revival got underway while I was in seminary, and it shaped my understanding of our tradition and its meaning. On September 16th, 2001, the Sunday after the national trauma of 9/11, I could do no other thing than preach on the text of our church's most common affirmation. Love is the doctrine of this church, the quest for truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer. And it was that affirmation that grounded Alice Blair Wesley's men's lectures. We were, all of us, exploring, trying to wrap our hearts and minds around what it meant as a practical matter to make covenants. One place we introduced covenant making early on was in our children's classes, where at the beginning of the church year, we engage the children in making a classroom covenant, promising one another how they will behave toward each other all year. Perhaps one of the most profound and far-reaching changes in subsequent years was our collective exploration of covenants of right relationship, because it got all of us, adults as well, into exactly the kinds of conversations our 17th century ancestors in faith engaged in as they deliberatively, with much thought and care, established their free churches. And now, look what we've just done today. Nothing gives me deeper feelings of hope for our faith than this thing we now do. Not write down and forget, but faithfully and regularly practice together. More than any other single reality, said Alice Blair Wesley, the spirit of mutual love redeems and enhances human life. The good news is we can learn to recognize the presence of the spirit of mutual love among us. And we can, in response, organize ourselves into a free church, a group religiously dedicated to giving the spirit of love a fine chance of working among us for our own sakes and for the sake of the world around us. And so we have. Hallelujah. Amen.
I invite our chalice lighter, Amber, back to extinguish our chalice. And please join us in the closing words, which are in the order of service. Go out into the world in peace. Have courage. Hold on to what is good. Return to no person evil for evil. Strengthen the faint-hearted. Support the weak. Help the suffering. And honor all beings.
And always lean in to the spirit of mutual love.